Good evening. Yesterday on this program, we discussed the executive order which was activated by President Trump requiring an assessment of foreign interference in our elections. That report is going to be coming soon, and it might result in President Trump using what are known as emergency powers. However, outside of that executive order, we need to discuss the very real possibility of the Insurrection Act being invoked here in America in the very near future. Let's discuss it together. This is your 2020 election update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Now, yesterday, General Michael Flynn said something very, very interesting. He said that President Trump still has options regarding the contested election, including seizing voting machines and using what he called military capabilities to rerun the election in key battleground states. Now, what he's likely referring to is the Insurrection Act of 1807. What is that? Well, let's go all the way back to our third president, Thomas Jefferson. During his presidency, Congress enacted what's known as the Insurrection Act of 1807, and Jefferson signed it into law. The reason for the act, at that time at least, was to foil a plot of a former Revolutionary War hero, a man named Aaron Burr, who was at that time raising an army to establish his own dynasty in the Louisiana Territory. Okay, so what does this Insurrection Act allow the president to actually do? Well, it allows the deployment of both U.S. military as well as federalized National Guard troops to suppress civil disorders, insurrections, and rebellions. Specifically, a section of the act states, and bear with it a little bit because it's in Old English, whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States makes it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. Okay, now generally, the U.S. military tries to remain as free as possible from getting involved in civil conflicts on U.S. soil because frankly, no one wants military personnel using physical force against American citizens. For example, if you remember, earlier this year when President Trump was threatening to invoke this Insurrection Act and send in the National Guard to put down the George Floyd protest, as well as get rid of that autonomous zone in Seattle, the defense secretary openly disagreed with him. Now, that defense secretary was, of course, Mark Esper, who is now gone, but ultimately, President Trump wound up not invoking the Insurrection Act, which kind of shows you just how much of a last resort measure it is. Even when you have cities on fire and self-declared autonomous zones popping up, it's still not something that you want to use. But let's consider the possibility of the Insurrection Act being invoked today. There is an argument to be made for its being used to address unlawful obstructions to verifying ballots and an insurrection surrounding the 2020 general election. Now, in this discussion, we need to make two big distinctions between this moment now and what happened earlier this year. First of all, Mark Esper is no longer the defense secretary. President Trump replaced him with Christopher Miller, who used to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And secondly, troops could be deployed to the swing states in order to take control over the ballots as well as the voting machines, rather than sending the troops over to suppress and disperse rioters. Although frankly, given the sentiment of this country right now, if troops were sent to take control over ballots and voting machines in several swing states, you likely will have a new wave of rioters as well as protests across the country. Now, in the comment section below our videos, I've seen more and more people discuss the possibility of martial law being enacted in America. So let's discuss that for a moment. What does martial law actually mean? Basically, in its very simplest terms, martial law means that the military has replaced the standing government. And along with that, the highest ranking military official, in America's case, that would be the president of the US, President Trump, would become the head of state, and the country's constitution, along with both individual rights and freedoms, would become temporarily suspended. Now, at that point, the U.S. military would then assume control of all law enforcement duties in the United States, and both the local police officers as well as the sheriffs would then assist them. Now, here's a very important distinction to be made. If President Trump is to invoke the Insurrection Act, that is not actually a declaration of martial law. The Constitution would not be suspended, nor would habeas corpus be suspended. With the Insurrection Act, the president would actually be using the troops to enforce the already existing laws, not override the laws. So how might this actually play out in real life? Well, one way is that let's say the Insurrection Act gets invoked. Then the military personnel across the country would seize control of crucial election evidence, such as ballots, envelopes, Dominion voting machines, as well as the servers, and then the military would conduct an immediate and thorough forensic audit of the votes. That way, in strict accordance with the current state laws, all of the lawful ballots would be counted and the unlawful ballots would be disqualified. Now that sounds simple in theory, but the political backlash would likely be intense if the military were to get involved. Specifically, what would happen likely is that the media would brand this as a coup, and the millions of people who were satisfied with the Joe Biden victory would likely rise up and protest. And in that scenario, real martial law might then be enacted. But again, that is a super last resort measure. There was an article, I think very recently in the Military Times, in which a Syracuse professor who is an expert on national security law, he was quoted as saying, martial law has no place in the United States absent a complete breakdown of civil governing mechanisms. So honestly, none of those scenarios seem that great, nor am I advocating for any of them, by the way. I'm just reporting the possibilities, explaining the surrounding laws and the context, and then you can make up your own mind regarding what you think should happen next. All right, now there has been a bit of a development since we did the in-studio filming of that portion. Take a look at this. The Pentagon has stopped giving defense briefings to the Joe Biden transition team. Wow. So a lot of people online I saw, they've been speculating that this is somehow tied to the invocation of the Insurrection Act. So what we did was that we actually reached out to the Department of Defense for comment, and they got back to us. Here's a quote from Christopher Miller, who's the head of the DoD. He said, quote, "Our key focus in the next 2 weeks is supporting essential requests for information on Operation Warp Speed." That's, of course, the COVID-19 operation, right? And he said that after the mutually agreed upon holiday pause, meaning that it was mutually agreed upon between the Joe Biden transition team and the Pentagon that they would stop exchanging defense briefings, we will continue with the transition and reschedule meetings afterwards. Now, what's interesting is that a spokesperson for Joe Biden's transition team actually disputed that statement. He said that, quote, "There was no mutually agreed upon holiday break." So that is quite interesting. Who's telling the truth and why is there this dispute between the two statements? I don't know, but a lot of people were saying that President Trump actually had a meeting today at 3 p.m. Eastern time with Christopher Miller, and they're wondering whether that had something to do with it, whether they discussed either these defense briefings or perhaps the Insurrection Act getting invoked. I'm not sure. We'll keep you abreast of developments as they're coming about. This will be one of the articles that'll be in the description box below this video. Otherwise, Roman in the studio, back to you. And by the way, I would love to hear your opinions. I try to spend about an hour every single day reading through the comments below our videos. So let me know your thoughts about martial law by leaving a comment below this video and telling me what you think about it for yourself. Also, we recently published a very long and detailed explanation of both the Insurrection Act, the reasoning for it to be invoked right now, as well as how it might actually play out in practice. I'll throw a link to that article in the description box below this video for you to check out for yourself and then make up your own decision. And of course, while you're down there looking for that link, take a quick moment to smash that like button. As you can already tell, both the mainstream media and these giant tech conglomerates, they are routinely censoring your access to honest information, sort of like what we're presenting here in this video. So by hitting that like button, if the system is still working somewhat properly, you are forcing the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people, letting the truth be known far and wide. Now let's head on over to Michigan. 2 days ago, a hand recount confirmed that a Michigan county falsely reported that Joe Biden won on election night. The recount was in Antrim County, and it found 9,759 votes for President Trump versus 5,959 votes for Joe Biden. Now that's a pretty big margin to get wrong, and here's a timeline of how it actually happened. On November 3rd, county officials said that Joe Biden had won the county by over 3,000 votes. However, 2 days later, on November 5th, they changed their tune and said that Trump had actually won the county by about 2,500 votes. And about 2 weeks after that, they certified President Trump as being the actual winner by nearly 4,000 votes. So think about that. In a relatively small county that I could probably count myself given a day or two, Trump's numbers went from him losing by 3,000 to winning by 2,500 to then winning a few weeks later by 4,000. Now, even though Antrim County has 22 Dominion voting machines, the officials actually blamed these strange numbers on human error. However, there was an independent forensic audit which was conducted, and we reported on that just a few days ago. The link will be here in the top right corner. And that audit found that the Dominion voting machines in Antrim County intentionally generated an enormously high number of ballot errors, causing the ballots to enter a process known as adjudication, which was then conducted with no oversight, no transparency, and no audit trail. Now, this all sounds very strange, and in order to get to the bottom of what is actually going on, Michigan's Secretary of State ordered a zero-margin risk-limiting audit to be conducted in Antrim County. and it is being carried out right now as we're making this video. Now, in terms of updates from this audit thus far, we actually got one from a representative of the Michigan Bureau of Elections. She told us that the preliminary results from the audit show an additional 11 ballots found for President Trump, while Biden's vote count went down by 1 vote. Okay, well, you might say that them finding an additional 11 votes for Trump and 1 less vote for Biden is pretty small, it's pretty minimal, but there's a different way to look at it. Because Antrim County is relatively small, I mean, in total they only had like 15,000 votes, so my thinking is this: what happens when you magnify this type of problem over the entire country? What would happen if you began conducting these types of audits across all of America? How many more votes might you find for President Trump, and how many less votes might you find for Joe Biden in this process? So that's one issue that I'm thinking about. What would this audit look like at scale? And the second issue that I'm personally thinking about is something I don't actually hear anybody else talking about, which is why does a county which has only 15,000 votes need 22 Dominion voting machines? I mean, I don't want to get into any kind of conspiratorial theories, but just from a government spending perspective, how do they justify spending so much money to buy these voting machines to count so few votes? I mean, just as I mentioned earlier, if you get me and a couple of my buddies to count 15,000 votes, it would just take a day or two. And if you do it by hand, there wouldn't be this whole problem of trusting machines. Now, regardless, we'll keep an eye on the developments in this zero margin risk limiting audit in Antrim County and let you know if any more developments come about. I'll also throw the link about this recount in the description box below this video for you to check out. And now let's move on over to Georgia. Actually, before we move on over to Georgia, I want to talk about this report which just dropped. Such a big deal. The Supreme Court has just ruled that the federal government may remove illegal aliens from the 2020 census count. That is huge news because, for one, as I'm sure you're aware, the census is actually what determines the number of congressional seats as well as electoral votes for every state. And the Trump administration was fighting hard to get that citizenship question on the census before it was conducted, but it dragged out for so long that it wound up not happening. But now, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government may remove illegal aliens from the census count. So this is a big deal. I don't know if you remember, but back in July of 2020, the Pew Research Center, they released a report which found that in their analysis, when you do this, when you remove illegal aliens from the count, California, Florida, and Texas each lose 1 congressional seat, while Alabama, Minnesota, and Ohio actually keep a seat because those things are based on population change, right? The appointments are based on population change. And when you account for those illegal aliens, those 3 states keep a seat while those other 3 states lose a seat. Wow, this is big news. However, this ruling apparently leaves a lot of possibility for further challenges, and they acknowledge that the Trump administration will have difficulty implementing their policy. In fact, the court stated in their opinion that, quote, "At present, this case is riddled with contingencies and speculation that impede judicial review." And in fact, the ACLU is quoted as saying that once the Trump administration begins to attempt to implement this policy, they are going to sue, and they said that, quote, "We will win." So anyway, we'll throw this article in the description box below this video for you to check out for yourself. And now we can really go over to Georgia. Georgia's Secretary of State announced yesterday that Georgia will be conducting a statewide signature audit of all mail-in ballots in all of Georgia's 159 counties. So he announced that the state of Georgia will actually be partnering with the University of Georgia to conduct this audit. The Secretary of State said that this partnership will help install confidence in Georgia's absentee ballot system for future elections. He also went on to say that despite endless lawsuits and wild allegations from Washington, D.C. pundits, we have seen no actual evidence of widespread voter fraud, though we are investigating all credible reports. Okay. Well, in a totally unrelated note, I'm going to throw a link to an episode that we did about last week, which shows a video of surveillance footage of crates of ballots being pulled out from under tables in the middle of the night in Georgia. I hope you don't click on that link because there's nothing to see there. Now, President Trump on Twitter wrote earlier this month that I will easily, quickly win in Georgia if Governor Brian Kemp or the Secretary of State permit a simple signature verification. So while we did not get a comment from him, it is likely that President Trump is satisfied with this development over in Georgia. However, the Secretary of State, when calling for this audit, does not think that it will change the result. He flatly said that this audit will not change the outcome of the November election. So we'll keep you abreast of any developments with the signature audit over in Georgia, and as soon as we hear any news, we'll let you know right away. In the meantime, if you would like to read the full statement from the Secretary of State, I'll throw that link in the description box below this video for you to check out. And lastly, I'd like to do 2 things. First of all, today is this channel's 1-month anniversary. Here's how it started, and here's how it's going. So we now have over 300,000 subscribers. So from my entire team here at the Epic Times, I would like to thank you for joining us on this journey. I'd like to thank you for smashing that like button, which has been sharing these videos out to thousands of more people. And I'd like to thank you for deciding to spend your evenings watching our program. We will continue to deliver you with honest news as long as we can. And lastly, we were in Washington, D.C. last weekend, and I got some very touching interviews over at the Jericho March, which had people of faith from around the country come in support of election integrity, as well as in support of President Trump. And here's what they had to say.
What brings you out here today?
We're here to fight for our country because it's 1776 in America again. And we have to honor the heritage of our country, that there were always people that paid the price so others can be free. So the Patriots Awards, we got to stand up. We can't be discouraged by the Supreme Court ruling. It's not over yet. We're going to fight all the way to the end until there's victory. And Donald J. Trump is inaugurated for his second term. And when he gets in his second term, the swamp is in trouble, and they know it.
We have to fight for freedom. There's a reason why people's blood's all over the ground, all over. We talk about it, we mention it, we show it to our kids, and we teach it in schools because it mattered.
Well, I'm a pastor, so from a spiritual perspective, I believe the media, they're the modern day prophets of Baal, which means everything that's spewed out of them is a lie. So I listen to the Holy Spirit, and I listen to all of the great patriots that are speaking truth.
What would you tell Americans who might be losing heart?
Don't give up. There was an executive order passed in 2018. I don't think we've even seen the beginning of this yet. So just stay the course. Don't lose heart.
Yeah, hang in there and pray. We almost lost the battle against the British, right? And our soldiers, without any arms, without any clothes, in the snow, bare feet, they were hurting, they were injured, they were, field bandages, and they continued and continued and continued till they won.
Liberty is not the natural state of the human condition. And so we want to preserve the liberty that we have and just make sure that it's truly a free election and transparent, because I believe this is a spiritual battle.
There's going to be debates. Did Trump win? Did Biden win? It doesn't matter because God wins.
Right on.
Lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like this type of honest news content delivered directly to your YouTube feed. And by the way, if you've already subscribed, just double check to make sure that you're still subscribed. YouTube seems to be getting cute with unsubscribing our fans unwittingly. And also you can follow us on Parler, Instagram, and sign up for our email newsletter. That way, if anything ever happens here on this channel, we can always stay in touch. And until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed and stay free.